My name is Rachel Hayes. I'm 34 and family dinners have always been the stage where I vanish. My brother gets the spotlight, my parents' endless praise while I sit at the edge unseen. For years their laughter rolled past me like I didn't exist. But silence can be powerful. I carried mine like armor, waiting for the moment it would roar louder than their applause. And that night, during our so-called celebration, it did. The world they thought they knew was about to turn upside down because of me. Ever wondered what happens when the one ignored is the one holding the biggest secret in the room? Stay with me. You'll find out. I stepped into the lobby of the Four Seasons in Boston, heels clicking against polished marble, the scent of expensive perfume clinging to the air. Every year, this was our family's tradition. They called it a celebration. To me, it always felt like a performance. Same stage, same lines, same applause. The chandeliers glittered above the banquet hall. Glasses of wine sparkled in the light as relatives toasted with exaggerated laughter. My cousins showed off sequined dresses and luxury watches, voices pitched just loud enough for everyone to hear. They knew their roles well. And then there was me. I wore a plain black blazer, clean, simple, unremarkable. Compared to their silk and diamonds, it was like I had stepped onto the wrong set. I slipped into a chair halfway down the table. No one looked up. No one asked about my work, my life, or even why I came alone. I had long ago mastered the art of vanishing in plain sight. Daniel never vanished. He arrived like a headliner walking onto stage. At 38, he was still the shining star, my parents' favorite son, the man relatives compared their own children to. Tonight was no different. He stood at the head of the table, raising a crystal glass, his smile perfectly timed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice filling the room with ease. "Greenmart has just opened its 50th location. An expansion into the Midwest is already in motion." The applause was instant. Chairs scraped as people leaned forward, eager to congratulate him. "Incredible," someone said. "Brilliant," added another. My mother's voice trembled with joy. "So proud of you, Daniel." My father's chest swelled. "Our son, the visionary." Their admiration bounced around the room like light off the chandeliers. None of it touched me. I sat with hands folded, neatly rehearsing the silence I knew was expected. Every year followed the same script: Daniel, the hero, my parents, the loyal audience, the rest of the family, the chorus clapping on cue. My role was always the same mute background. And then, right on schedule, Daniel decided to improvise. He tilted his head toward me, his grin turning sharp. "And there's my sister," he announced. His voice softened into mock pity. "Still chasing small projects, aren't you? Tell me, Rachel, how's whatever it is you do?" The words floated through the hall like perfume gone sour. A cousin snorted into her glass. An uncle coughed to hide a chuckle. My mother busied herself with her napkin, eyes pointed anywhere but me. I smiled politely, though my jaw ached from holding it. They thought I hadn't heard that kind of jab before. They thought I'd grown used to being the punchline. Daniel swirled his wine, smirking. "At least you're consistent." This time laughter wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to remind me how easily they all fell into the rhythm of dismissing me. I lifted my glass of water. My hand was steady. Inside my stomach turned, but I didn't let it show. They only saw what they wanted: a plain blazer. A woman who never quite measured up, a sister who existed only in comparison. What they didn't see was the weight of power resting in the phone tucked inside my bag. They didn't see the truth waiting just beyond that chandelier-lit room. I leaned back, letting the laughter fade into background noise. My mother's sigh reached me, long, heavy, practiced. My father checked his phone again, as if avoiding the sight of me entirely. Voiceover. In their eyes, I was the child who never rose high enough, the one left in the shadow of Daniel's spotlight. But silence had taught me more than words ever could. I glanced at my wristwatch. The second hand ticked in its steady rhythm. 7:45 p.m. 10 minutes until the curtain lifted. 10 minutes until the story they thought they knew collapsed. I raised the glass again, taking a slow sip, eyes fixed on Daniel as he basked in adoration. No one noticed the flicker in my expression. No one sensed the storm I carried quietly like a secret too big to keep hidden any longer. And as he launched into another tale of Greenmart's triumphs, his voice echoing through the hall, I let a faint smile spread across my face. Not the smile of the invisible sister, not the smile of the woman they thought they could overlook. It was the smile of someone who knew the balance of the room was about to shift. For the first time, the weight wasn't on me. It was on them, though they didn't know it yet. The glow of the Boston ballroom blurred, and in its place came the bite of cold Massachusetts air years earlier. I was standing in a narrow plot behind our old house, a patch of dirt my parents called a garden. The wind cut through the thin jacket I wore, but I kept bending low, trimming stems and bundling flowers into baskets. Every stem meant coins. Every coin meant groceries or another second-hand textbook. From the window I could see Daniel stretched across the living room couch. Sneakers kicked off the sports section balanced on his knees. He had a basketball game coming up, the big one. The whole house revolved around. He didn't see me working outside. Or if he did, it didn't matter. His stage was the gym floor, mine was the cold ground. One afternoon, my father stepped onto the porch, his boots creaking against the wood. He looked past me, barely pausing, his gaze settling instead through the window at Daniel. His voice softened. That boy, he's the hope of this family. I froze the basket, nearly full mud streaking my sleeves. I was standing only a few feet away, but I may as well have been invisible. It wasn't the first time. Praise in that house always floated past me, carried away like smoke settling neatly on Daniel's shoulders. At the market, I stood behind a wooden booth that smelled of wilted stems and damp earth. I learned to smile even when customers haggled me down to coins. Those coins clinked in my pockets all the way home, louder to me than the silence that waited at the dinner table. That evening I placed a few crumpled bills on the counter. My mother didn't glance up. Daniel walked in hair damp from practice, tossing his bag onto the floor. She rushed toward him, wiping sweat from his brow with a napkin, beaming. He ate before I had time to wash my hands. I slipped into a chair quietly, my stomach twisted not from hunger, but from the sharp contrast him being served, me being overlooked. Daniel leaned against the doorway, smirk tugging at his lips. "You'll never be more than this," he said, sweeping a hand toward me as if pointing to an entire existence he had reduced to a shrug. The words weren't new. He had found many ways to shrink me over the years. Sometimes it was ordinary, sometimes small time, sometimes nothing more than silence. Each cut was different, but the wound felt the same. I gripped the strap of my bag, saying nothing. If I argued, he'd laugh. If I stayed silent, he'd still feel victorious. Either way, my place in that house stayed the same background noise. Voiceover. That was the moment I understood. My role wasn't chosen by me, it was assigned, and no one planned to change it. Years passed. Graduation night arrived. The high school auditorium smelled of hairspray and excitement, the air buzzing with flashbulbs. Families crowded the bleachers, shouting names, raising cameras. Daniel crossed the stage in his Letterman jacket to accept an athletic award. The applause was deafening. My parents rose to their feet, clapping until their palms must have burned. When he stepped down, they wrapped him in their arms as photographers crowded close. I stood at the edge of the group, holding a thin certificate that read, "Most Dedicated Student." The paper bent in my grip. No one asked me to pose for a photo. No one even glanced in my direction. I smiled anyway, but it felt brittle like glass ready to crack. The sound of cameras carved the truth into me more deeply than any insult Daniel had spoken. That night the house was quiet. The certificate lay on my desk, already curling at the edges. I lay awake, whispering into the dark words I was almost afraid to say. If they see me as ordinary, then I'll prove what extraordinary looks like. It wasn't rage that carried me, it was resolved. The vow settled into me like a seed pressed into soil, silent but alive. Back in the present, the murmur of the ballroom pulled me out of memory. My hand tightened on the stem of my water glass. Across the table, Daniel laughed loudly, the same laugh that had once filled our kitchen, the same sound that told me I didn't belong. Voiceover. They believed silence meant defeat. They believed their labels would last forever. But silence carried long enough becomes a weapon, and labels can be torn away. I glanced at the clock on the wall of the ballroom. 7:50 p.m. The second hand ticked. My pulse matched its rhythm. I let a smile return, small, measured, deliberate. Not the smile of a girl ignored on graduation night. Not the smile of the sister they dismissed as background. It was the smile of a woman who knew that the past was finally about to answer the present. The ballroom shimmered with golden light candles flickering across the long table set with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. The sound of forks against porcelain rang politely, but to me the whole scene felt cold. I sat quietly adjusting the sleeve of my black blazer, surrounded by gowns that sparkled and tuxedos that caught the light. My chair seemed smaller than the rest, as if it had been placed there only to fill a gap, not to include me. I lifted my glass of water, holding it steady while I tried to focus on something ordinary. That's when I heard my mother's sigh. She reached for her napkin, folded it again, though it was already perfect, and let out a long breath, heavy enough for half the table to hear. Her eyes brushed over me once, carrying a message she didn't need to say aloud. Disappointment. The same weight she had carried in her gaze for as long as I could remember. My father sat beside her, his eyes glued to the glow of his phone. Thumb scrolling, expression blank, as if erasing my presence required no effort at all. His silence wasn't neutral, it was intentional. He had mastered the art of ignoring me the way other men mastered sports or music. Daniel leaned back, wine glass in hand, comfortable as always. The candlelight caught his smile, making it gleam just enough to pull every eye in the room toward him. He shifted in his chair posture, deliberate, as though preparing to deliver another performance. My relatives leaned closer, waiting. Some smirked preemptively, already anticipating his charm. My mother's hands stilled in her lap, folded tightly, her sigh now replaced by an expectant hush. The table belonged to him. It always did. Then came his words, not sharp, not loud, but smooth, casual, almost playful. Some people never change, he said. His tone was light, but it carried down the length of the table. You can dress them up, but they'll always be the same underneath. The remark wasn't directed by name, but every glance flicked toward me. An uncle chuckled softly. A cousin bit back a grin. Another relative nodded as if Daniel had uttered some eternal truth worth sealing in marble. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough. It pricked at my skin, settled deep in my stomach. I placed my glass carefully back on the table, forcing my fingers steady. I managed a thin smile, the kind you wear when the alternative is too revealing. Inside, though, something shifted. They saw only the blazer, plain and understated. They saw the quiet woman at the far end of the table. To them, I was still background, someone whose years of work meant little, whose presence was tolerated, but never celebrated. They had frozen me in an old version of myself, blind to everything I had built beyond their sight. Daniel took a sip of wine, his grin widening. Around him, laughter bubbled again, drawn to his ease. My silence to them was confirmation. Proof that he was right, proof that I had nothing worth saying. But they mistook quiet for surrender. They always had. Under the table, my phone buzzed softly against the fabric of my jacket. I slipped it out discreetly, shielding the glow with my hand. One new message. From Maya. Acquisition confirmed. Embargo 8-0. My pulse jumped. I locked the screen quickly and pressed the phone against my leg, hidden once more. I glanced down at my wrist. The hands of my watch caught the candlelight, steady and precise. 7:50 p.m. 10 minutes. That was all it would take. In 10 minutes, the balance of everything in this room would shift. I looked across the table at Daniel. He was still smiling, still soaking in the chorus of admiration. He had no idea that the ground beneath him had already started to tremble. My mother folded her napkin yet again, sighing as though my existence drained her. My father's eyes stayed locked on his phone, the scrolling never pausing. Around them, relatives leaned in closer to Daniel, feeding his pride, reinforcing his illusion. I straightened in my chair, smoothing the fabric of my blazer. The chatter washed over me like static. None of it mattered anymore. Sometimes silence is surrender, but sometimes silence is the pause before everything changes. I raised my glass, taking a sip. The cool water steadied my breath. My phone buzzed again just once, as if reminding me of the clock's steady march. I set the phone beside me and lifted my gaze. Daniel's eyes found mine across the flicker of candlelight. His smirk curved wider, daring me to respond, daring me to break the silence. I didn't. I didn't need to, because in 10 minutes his laughter would end, and the chair he occupied so easily would no longer belong to him. When they dismissed me as nothing more than a girl from the dirt, I knew I had to find new ground. That ground turned out to be a skyscraper on Wall Street. I still remember my first autumn in New York. The air smelled like ambition and exhaust, sharp and unrelenting. I walked into Liberty Capital clutching a worn tote bag resume folded inside, though I doubted anyone bothered to read past the first line. My badge read Executive Assistant. In truth, it meant I fetched coffee, sorted endless copies, and booked flights for people who never learned my last name. Winter came and I learned quickly that assistants weren't meant to be noticed. I sat outside glass conference rooms waiting to refill pitchers of water while heels clicked past me. Powerful women strode by, voices sharp and commanding. Their conversations drifted through the doorway, mergers, assets, negotiations worth millions. I stayed quiet, but I listened. Every word was a page in the textbook I was writing in my head. By spring, the ridicule began. "She's just an assistant," I overheard one analyst mutter as I erased a whiteboard after a long meeting. They didn't know I had spent nights tracing the same financial reports they skimmed, learning them line by line, until I could explain them better than they could. Their laughter stung at first, but it didn't stop me. It fueled me. One evening, the weight of papers in my arms slipped. They scattered across the marble floor like leaves in a storm. As I scrambled to gather them, Ethan Brooks bent down to help. Back then he was only a vice president, but even then his reputation was sharp, fair, decisive. He handed me the last sheet and looked me directly in the eye. "Don't just clean up the meeting," he whispered. "Learn how to run it." That single sentence lasted longer than any smirk thrown my way. The years unfolded one season after another. I had no mentor waiting with shortcuts, no father pulling strings, no mother bragging about me over lunch with friends. What I had were textbooks stacked on a nightstand, silent hours studying models long after midnight, and a memory that clung to details others ignored. Every dismissive gesture, every wave of a hand, every laugh, it all hardened into fuel. 4 years in spring again, I was no longer carrying coffee trays. They promoted me to project manager. The same colleagues who once tossed files at my desk now leaned forward as I walked them through numbers. The first time I stood at the head of the boardroom, the weight of dozens of eyes on me, I presented a merger proposal everyone whispered would fail. It didn't. The deal closed in record time. By summer, the executives who once forgot my name couldn't stop repeating it. And so the climb continued. Year after year, floor by floor, I moved higher. In my 13th year, the elevator doors opened onto the top floor of Liberty Capital. At the end of the hall, waiting quietly, was my office. At 32, I became the youngest female CEO on Wall Street. No one threw me a party. I didn't post a photo. Instead, I sat behind the heavy oak desk looking out at Manhattan lit up against the night. The city glittered with 1,000 possibilities, but all I felt was stillness. They had no idea how many nights I had trudged home in worn-out flats notebooks, heavy with scribbles tucked under my arm, wondering if I'd ever rise above just an assistant. Back home in Massachusetts, my family still spoke of me as if nothing had changed. To them, Daniel was the star. The heir, the man with all the answers. I was invisible. But invisibility suited me. The less they saw, the more space I had to build without interference. Every humiliation in those early years became a brick. Every slight became mortar. Every "she'll never amount to much" was another layer in the foundation. Now when I leaned back in my chair, the leather firm under my shoulders, I thought of the weight of that file box I once struggled to carry down the hall. That same memory sharpened when I picked up a pen, knowing one signature could move millions. Daniel still chased spotlights, still basked in applause at dinner tables. He never understood that silence can be sharper than noise. I built my empire in silence, and silence became my weapon. Outside my window, the skyline glowed. I rested my hands on the armrests, steady calm. My thoughts drifted back to those family dinners where Daniel raised his glass, mocking me with words he thought would stick forever. He didn't realize that while he laughed, I was building the very bank that would hold his future. Because real power doesn't need to announce itself. It grows in the shadows year by year until one day it steps into the light. And that day was closer than he could ever imagine. While I was climbing each rung at Liberty Capital, the empire Daniel bragged about was beginning to shake. It didn't happen overnight. Empires rarely fall in a single blow. They crumble slowly from cracks no one bothers to notice. Inside the Green Mart headquarters, the atmosphere was heavy. The conference room's fluorescent lights hummed faintly, casting a pale glare over binders stacked high across the table. Red numbers bled through every page of the financial report. The silence among executives was louder than any alarm. Paul Reynolds. The CFO adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. He was a meticulous man, never one for theatrics. That made his tone all the more jarring. "We've lost the Riverton Farms contract," he said flatly. "Our largest produce supplier. Effective immediately." A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel leaned back in his leather chair, arms crossed as if this was a trivial inconvenience. Paul continued, his voice steady but strained. "Lease costs have increased 15% this year. Meanwhile, revenue for the last quarter fell below projections by almost 20%. Someone at the far end shifted uncomfortably. Daniel smirked, swirling the wine-red liquid in his glass. "Green Mart has weathered worse," he said, projecting confidence. "This is temporary. We'll pivot." Paul's expression didn't change. He slid another packet across the table, his fingers deliberate. "This isn't temporary, Daniel. Our debt covenants are at risk. If we breach them, the bank can call the loans. We won't have the liquidity to cover it." For a brief second, the smirk faltered. Then Daniel leaned forward, his voice firm. "Green Mart is untouchable. Our brand is too strong." It was the same tone he had used at family dinners when he dismissed me, convinced that charm and arrogance could bend reality. But numbers aren't swayed by pride. Paul's patience cracked. "This isn't about brand perception. This is mathematics. You can't ignore numbers because they don't fit your narrative." His words cut through the room, leaving an uncomfortable stillness in their wake. From my distance, watching through reports and whispers that reached Liberty Capital, I could picture Daniel's jaw tightening. For years, he'd been celebrated as the golden son, the fearless leader. And now in his own boardroom, he was being challenged, humiliated by the very people paid to follow his orders. The tension only grew when the conference room doors burst open. A junior analyst, out of breath, held a freshly printed email. "It's from the First Union," he said nervously. "They wanted this read immediately." Paul snatched the paper, scanning quickly before speaking aloud. "If Green Mart does not restructure debt or secure a buyer within 90 days, the bank will initiate proceedings to recover outstanding loans." The words hung heavy in the air. Executives exchanged glances. Some looked down, fiddling with pens, while others sighed in resignation. Daniel chuckled bitterly, pushing his chair back just slightly. "They're bluffing. Banks always threaten. We'll find a way." But the truth was written in black and white, stamped with the bank's logo. No one else in the room laughed. I imagined Paul sitting straighter, gathering his papers with quiet finality. "We are out of time, Daniel," he said. "This is no longer about ambition. This is survival." And yet Daniel couldn't hear it. He refused to. To admit the danger would mean admitting weakness. And Daniel Hayes had built his entire identity on being the man who never faltered. As I absorbed the reports, one thought settled deep inside me: I didn't need to bring Green Mart down. Daniel was doing it himself. His arrogance was the hammer striking against the cracks. By the end of that meeting, the company's future wasn't just uncertain, it was hanging by a thread. Managers left the room quietly, shoulders heavy, avoiding Daniel's gaze. No one wanted to be the next to tell him the truth he refused to hear. Daniel snatched the email from Paul's hands and crumpled it into a tight ball. He tossed it into the trash bin, his face stone hard. But that didn't erase the words. Default risk. It glared back from the crumpled page as though mocking him. From my corner of the world, high in Liberty Capital's towers, I allowed myself a rare smile. The downfall didn't need my push. The house Daniel built on pride and denial was collapsing, and I knew when the dust settled, Liberty Capital would be waiting. The crisis at Green Mart was no longer a rumor. It was documented, time-stamped, and acknowledged. And soon it would be exploited. Because sometimes revenge doesn't require striking first. Sometimes you just wait patient watching as your enemy digs his own grave one stubborn decision at a time. And Daniel Hayes was digging fast. While Daniel was still bathing in his illusion of invincibility, I had already set the board. He thought Green Mart was untouchable. He thought the empire he built would stand no matter what the numbers said. But numbers never lie. And I had learned long ago to trust them more than words. The Manhattan skyline stretched beyond the glass walls of Liberty Capital's conference room. From 60 floors above the street, the city looked both powerful and fragile, like something you could hold in your hand but lose in a blink. It was late evening, the windows glowing with the reflection of office towers, the hum of the city far below. Inside there were only 3 of us. Ethan Brooks, my COO, and the man who had once told me to learn to run the meeting, not just clean it up. Harper Lee, our M&A lawyer, sharp calm, every word weighed carefully. And me. Not the gardener girl they had once dismissed. Not the younger sister sitting quietly at family dinners. But the CEO making a move that would shake the very table Daniel sat at so proudly. Ethan clicked the remote, and the slide deck lit the wall. "We won't buy Green Mart directly," he explained. His voice was steady, practical. "We'll create an SPV, a special purpose vehicle. It shields Liberty Capital, ensures confidentiality. No one connects the dots until we want them to." I nodded. It wasn't just about winning. It was about winning without giving them a chance to stop me. Harper unfolded a neat stack of papers, the NDA glinting under the conference light. She pushed it across the polished wood toward me. "Rachel, you'll need to recuse yourself from formal votes. Conflict of interest is the one thing that can undo this. We'll do it by the book." I held the pen steady, signing each page without hesitation. The sound of my signature scratching across the paper felt louder than it should have. With each line, the distance between me and Daniel grew wider. Harper paused, eyes narrowing slightly as she leaned back. "Let me be blunt," she said. "This will not be a quiet acquisition. Daniel will see it as personal. The shareholders may push back. The press will spin it as family against family. You'll be the target. Are you prepared for that?" I set the pen down, looked straight at her. I've endured their words my entire life. The difference now is simple. I'm no longer on defense. Ethan exhaled softly, almost like a laugh, then slid another binder across the table. "These are the closing documents. We've secured financing. The covenants are tight. All we need is your signature." I ran my hand along the cover. The binder was heavier than it looked. Inside it was everything: the collapse of Daniel's empire, the validation of years spent being told I wasn't enough, the silent power I had built while they mocked. I flipped through page after page, the legal jargon blurring into a rhythm I had learned to read long ago. I wasn't that girl with dirt under her nails anymore. I was the woman who understood leverage. I signed. Page after page, my name etched into the deal. Harper glanced at her watch. "The announcement goes live at 8 sharp, she said. "Press release wires the works. And if I'm not mistaken, that's exactly when your family dinner is scheduled to peak." For a moment, silence. Then the smallest smile crossed my face. I turned toward the glass, the city reflected back at me in 1,000 tiny lights. Perfect timing. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel would be raising a glass, spinning his usual stories of Green Mart's glory. The family would nod, laugh, cheer. And at that exact moment, the world would learn that Greenmart no longer belonged to him. I looked back at Harper and Ethan. We do this clean. No shortcuts. I don't need revenge in the shadows. I need justice in plain sight. Harper nodded once firm. Ethan closed his binder with a final clap. The sound echoed like a gavel. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of it settle. For years they had boxed me into the corner of family gatherings, reduced me to nothing more than a gardener. Tonight I had rewritten that narrative. And when the pen hit the last page, I knew life as Daniel knew it was finished. Outside Manhattan pulsed with light. Cars streaked across bridges. Office towers gleamed. Somewhere across town, Daniel was likely savoring another toast. But the ground beneath him had already shifted. I stood gathering the papers into a single folder, pressing my hand against the bold black letters stamped across the front Greenmart acquisition. This wasn't just business. It was the end of being invisible. And as I walked out of that glass room, leaving Harper and Ethan behind, the city stretched endlessly before me, alive with the kind of energy that only comes when history is about to turn. Because at 8 o'clock, the truth would no longer be mine alone. It would belong to everyone, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same again. Family praise for Daniel never ended. Every toast circled back to him, every laugh seemed to rise higher when it was tied to his stories. But that night it wasn't just my family who reminded me of my place. The long banquet table glowed under crystal chandeliers. Laughter echoed as champagne was poured, bubbles catching the light like confetti in the air. I sat at the far end, a glass of water in front of me. The stem felt cool in my hand, grounding me, while the room buzzed with a warmth that never seemed to reach my seat. Daniel leaned back in his chair, recounting another tale about Greenmart's expansion. The room followed him like a conductor leading an orchestra. Every nod, every clap, every smile, all for him. I listened quietly, my fingers resting against the rim of my glass, when a new voice cut through the chatter. Rachel. The name carried a strange familiarity. I turned, and there she was, Elena Ramirez. A face I hadn't seen since college, but one I could never forget. Back then she thrived in comparison, always needing to win, always needing to place herself a step above. She stood at the end of the table, her sequined dress glittering under the light eyes sweeping the room until they landed on me. A smirk curved her lips, as if no time had passed since the days she measured her worth against mine. Well, she said loud enough for everyone to hear. Rachel, you're still keeping it simple, I see. No designer gown, no headline job title. Anyone here would brag about. Some things never change. The words landed sharp and deliberate. For a second silence lingered, then came the soft laughter. A few cousins exchanged glances, some smiling too broadly, others chuckling outright. My mother's hand froze mid-gesture before she turned her gaze back to Daniel, as if Elena's remark didn't deserve correction. I felt the room tilt, not because her words carried truth, but because they carried weight here among people always ready to believe the worst about me. I kept my smile in place, my eyes steady on Elena. My silence was deliberate. Inside, my thoughts moved fast. They wanted me to flinch, to defend myself, to reveal that I cared. But I had learned that silence unsettles more than denial. Elena tilted her head, clearly expecting a reaction. When none came, Daniel stepped in laughing, as though she had set him up for the perfect punchline. Well, not everyone's cut out for big stages, he said, his voice carrying easily down the table. Some people just stay where they are. The room responded with another wave of laughter. Glasses clinked, chairs shifted closer to him. I tightened my grip on the glass, the coolness anchoring me while heat spread in my chest. I didn't look away. Instead, my gaze slipped down to the watch on my wrist. 7:55 p.m. The second hand swept forward. My pulse matched its pace. Beneath the table, a soft vibration buzzed against my hip. I slid my hand into my jacket pocket, my thumb brushing over the phone screen to wake it. A new message from Maya appeared, clear and simple. Press release scheduled. 5 minutes. The timing struck me like a bell. 5 minutes until the world shifted. 5 minutes until every smug smile at this table froze in place. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, straightened my posture, and lifted the glass of water to my lips. The laughter around me swelled again, Elena leaning closer to Daniel, basking in borrowed confidence that was never hers to own. I let the glass linger against my mouth, watching them over the rim. They saw me as small, unimpressive, unworthy of a story. But they had no idea how wrong they were. The chandelier light glinted off my watch again. The minute hand moved forward. 4 minutes left. Elena laughed at something Daniel whispered, tilting her head back, her hand brushing his shoulder as though she belonged in the family circle more than I ever had. My father nodded approvingly at their banter, while my mother pressed her lips together, avoiding my side of the table altogether. To them, my silence was proof of smallness. To me, it was a strategy. I set the glass down carefully, my fingers steady now. The sound of forks and knives carried across the table, the chatter rising once more, but I barely heard it. My focus narrowed sharp as the ticking of my watch. I lifted my chin and let my gaze meet Elena's across the table. She smirked again, perhaps thinking she had won this little game of status. Daniel followed her look, his grin still wide, his posture smug. Neither of them noticed the faint vibration still echoing in my pocket, a countdown only I understood. Voiceover. They thought they were watching me shrink. What they didn't know was that I was only waiting for the light to shift, and when it did, their laughter would belong to the past. The watch struck 7:56. The seconds crawled forward. I leaned back slightly, my eyes never leaving the pair who thought they held the room. The camera in my mind pulled close on the dial of my watch, the second hand clicking louder than the laughter surrounding me. Because in just a few minutes the world outside that banquet hall would turn, and so would the balance inside it. And when the announcement came, it wouldn't be my silence they remembered. It would be the moment their words were swallowed whole by truth. Every clock has its rhythm, and at exactly 8 o'clock, mine struck louder than the laughter filling that banquet hall. The chandeliers sparkled above us, casting golden light over polished glasses and neatly folded napkins. Daniel's voice still carried across the table, his story drawing yet another round of applause. I sat quietly, a glass of water, untouched in front of me, the second hand on my watch nearing the hour. Then it began. Phones started buzzing around the room. First one, then another, until a ripple of vibrations and alert tones swept across the table. People leaned down to check their screens, confusion spreading. The noise of conversation slowed. A murmur rose from the far end of the hall as the large screen flickered to life. At first, just the CNN logo against a red background. Then the headline appeared bold and unmissable. Youngest female banking CEO buys $4.2 billion retail chain, Greenmart. The clinking of silverware froze. The room shifted in a single breath. I looked across the table. Daniel's hand, still holding his glass of wine, stopped mid-air. The smile on his face collapsed, replaced with disbelief. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the stem of the glass too tightly. My parents turned toward each other, their eyes wide, mouths slightly open, as if they were searching for words, but none came. Around them, relatives whispered in confusion, the applause that had filled the room moments ago now gone. I stood. The chair scraped back slowly, the sound cutting through the silence. I placed my glass of water gently on the table and walked toward the center of the room. Every eye followed me, but no one spoke. My voice carried evenly clear enough for all to hear. All my life I was the shadow, the gardener in your story, Daniel. While you stood under the spotlight, I was planting seeds in silence. I turned to face him fully, his jaw clenched, eyes darting toward the screen and back to me. The gardener, I said, my voice steady, just bought the garden. A wave of gasps swept through the hall. Someone dropped a fork onto a plate, the sharp clang echoing into the stillness. I reached into my bag and pulled out a plain white envelope. Crossing the last steps to Daniel's seat, I placed it directly in front of him. My hand lingered on it for just a second before pulling back. Termination, I said quietly, though the words seemed to ring through the room. Effective immediately. HR will process everything by morning. The air tightened around us. Daniel stared at the envelope, then at me, his face draining of color. His hand trembled as he finally set down his glass and pressed his fingers against the edge of the paper. No one dared break the silence. The relatives who had laughed earlier now looked down into their laps. Even Elena, who had walked in so sure of herself, stood frozen by the door, her smirk erased. Daniel swallowed hard, his lips parting as though to form a protest, but no sound came. His body slumped slightly, the envelope sitting like a weight before him. I stayed still, letting the silence stretch. Because silence, I had learned, could be louder than any declaration. Around us, the screen continued to replay the headline, the anchor's voice narrating details of the acquisition. Phrases like unexpected stunning and Rachel Hayes, the youngest female CEO in banking history, filled the air. The contrast was sharp, CNN praising me while my own family sat mute, their illusion of Daniel's untouchable reign unraveling in front of them. Daniel's shoulders shook once. His fingers clutched at the envelope again, but he didn't open it. He didn't need to. He knew what was inside. I stood a little taller, breathing in the stillness. The room that had moments ago been alive with celebration now felt heavy, each second stretching. No laughter. No clinking glasses, just the faint hum of the news anchor's voice and the sound of shallow breaths. The spotlight had shifted, not because I asked for it, but because the truth demanded it. The camera of the evening, the one no one could see but everyone could feel, focused on Daniel's face. His features drawn, his eyes darting, his confidence stripped away. I didn't smile. This wasn't about gloating. This was about balance being restored. I let my gaze sweep over the room, meeting the eyes of relatives, old friends, even my parents. None of them spoke. None of them defended him. And for the first time, none of them dismissed me. My voice returned one last time, soft but firm. The room you thought you owned, Daniel, has changed forever. The envelope remained on the table between us, his hand hovering over it like it burned to touch. And then came the final silence. A silence so deep, it turned the glittering banquet hall into something else entirely. A graveyard of illusions. The music that had played faintly in the background all evening had stopped. No one moved. No one. And all that remained was the sound of my breath, the ticking of my watch, and the crumbling of a kingdom that was never as strong as he believed. When truth finally breaks through, it doesn't just reveal. It burns away the masks people thought they could wear forever. The party had gone quiet. Not the soft lull of a night winding down, but the heavy silence that follows an earthquake. All that lingered was the faint clatter of silverware from a distant table, like another world where nothing had changed. At our table, Daniel gripped the envelope I had laid before him. His hand shook, the veins on his wrist taut against his skin. He pressed it down suddenly, the sound of paper against polished wood startling in the hush. "You betrayed this family," he spat, each word clipped, thrown like a stone across the table. His voice cracked on the last syllable. I saw the flush creeping up his neck, his chest rising with quick, uneven breaths. Across from him, my father lowered his gaze to the tablecloth, avoiding mine. My mother sat frozen back, rigid, her hands curled into fists in her lap. Neither of them moved to defend him. Neither dared to defend me. Their silence had always been their shield. I straightened, shoulders back, my own breath steady. Years of swallowing words rose now, not as anger, but as something colder, firmer. "I didn't betray anyone," I said, my voice even carrying to every ear in the room. "I only stopped letting you walk over me." The words landed with a weight that seemed to shift the air itself. For the first time, Daniel had no ready retort. His mouth opened, then shut again. His jaw clenched, but nothing came. The power that had always sat so easily on his side of the table slid quietly into mine. Inside, I felt the tremor of what I had just said. Not fear, no, not anymore. But the awareness that this moment, this exchange, was the break I had waited for my entire life. Around us, guests held their breath. The cousins who once laughed at his jokes stared down at their plates. Aunts who whispered about my ordinary life shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. None of them laughed now. None of them reached for him. And then I caught sight of her. Elena Ramirez. She had been standing near the edge of the room since the headline dropped, her arms crossed, a skeptical smirk threatening to form but never quite landing. Now her expression faltered. Her eyes moved between me and Daniel unsettled, as if the script she had come expecting had been rewritten in real time. For a heartbeat, our gazes locked. Hers carried questions, disbelief, perhaps even recognition of something she hadn't wanted to admit. Then she looked away. Without a word, Elena turned her heels, clicking sharply against the floor as she crossed the room. She didn't stop to offer Daniel sympathy, nor did she turn back toward me. She simply left. A quiet exit, but a loud message. I watched her go, but made no move to call after her. She had already played her part. Her silence now was louder than any insult she had thrown before. I let the weight of it settle the sight of Daniel still clinging to the envelope he refused to open. His knuckles white, his eyes darting from me to the screen still glowing in the corner of the room. His empire collapsed not in flames, but in shame. I exhaled slowly, then turned. Each step I took away from the table seemed to echo louder than the last. The heels of my shoes struck the polished wood floor, a steady rhythm that carried down the length of the hall. Behind me, no one spoke. Not Daniel, not my parents, not a single relative who had spent years treating me like the afterthought. No applause followed, no congratulations, just silence. And yet I didn't need their approval anymore. The silence itself was victory enough, because in that silence they had all seen the truth. I reached the far end of the hall and paused just long enough to let the moment linger. Then I kept walking. The doors swung open in front of me, and the night air met me cool and sharp. Behind me, the party remained in its hush, as if the weight of what had unfolded would keep them seated long after I was gone. Sometimes triumph doesn't need cheers. Sometimes it's enough to walk away and know they'll never look at you the same again. And with that, I left them sitting in the ruins of their own silence. 3 days can be short for some. For Daniel, it was enough time to watch his entire world collapse. Morning sunlight streamed into my office on the 60th floor of Liberty Capital. Manhattan sprawled beneath the glass, alive and humming, but up here the air was still. On my desk lay the morning edition of the Wall Street Journal. The headline stretched bold across the page: Liberty Capital completes Green Mart acquisition. The words stared back at me, heavy and final. Beside it, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The office line blinked red, demanding attention. My cell phone trembled with vibration against the wood. I glanced at the screen. 50 missed calls. Every single one from Daniel. The same brother who once laughed at my blazer, who dismissed me as nothing more than a gardener. Now all his persistence was reduced to unanswered calls. I placed the phone face down. The vibration dulled against the table, muffled, ignored. I reached for my pen and returned to the contract in front of me, my notes crisp against the margin. A knock interrupted the quiet. Maya slipped into the office, a folder in her hands. Her steps slowed before she reached my desk. "Rachel," she said softly, "Daniel's been calling here too. He's downstairs." I looked up. Her eyes searched mine, cautious. She was used to handling everything before it touched my desk, but this was different. "He came here?" I asked. She nodded. "He's in the lobby. He said he won't leave until he speaks with you." I closed the file, smoothing the edge with my one hand. My other hand rested flat against the desk. Calm, grounded. "He thinks I'll just open the door." My voice was steady, almost quiet. After everything, Maya shifted her weight. "Do you want me to send security?" The question hung in the room. For a moment, I let silence answer. Years of memories flickered his words at family dinners, the smirk he wore when he called me gardener, the way everyone laughed. Now he was waiting downstairs, stripped of applause, carrying nothing but desperation. "No," I said at last. "Let him wait." Maya lowered the folder onto my desk. "There are board notes for this afternoon. But he really does look bad." I caught the hesitation in her tone, almost sympathy. Maya had seen me claw my way through nights of doubt and days of endless work. She had also seen Daniel at the party, glowing in applause that turned to shock. "This isn't about sympathy," I said, my eyes fixed on the skyline beyond the glass. "It's about consequences." She gave a small nod as if to say she understood, though the weight of it lingered. The phone lit up again, his name across the screen. I let it ring out. Then another, and another. Each unanswered call built its own rhythm, louder in absence than in sound. 50 times he had tried. 50 times I had refused. Rachel Maya asked quietly, still standing near the door. I stood, the chair gliding back on its wheels. The sound of my heels striking the marble floor filled the office. I took my time crossing the room, each step deliberate. "Where exactly is he?" I asked. "In the lobby," she repeated. "Sitting by the front desk. He told reception he'll wait as long as it takes." I paused by the window, looking down at the city below. So many lives moving, unaware of the man sitting in my lobby, clinging to what he had already lost. "He'll wait," I said simply, "and I'll decide when it ends." Maya lingered a moment longer before retreating, the door clicking shut behind her. Alone, I let my gaze return to the paper on the desk. Greenmart. It was mine now. The irony of it all pressed in. He had mocked me for tending a garden, and I had bought his entire field. The buzzing started again. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I walked toward the door. My reflection followed me in the dark glass walls of the corridor, composed unshaken, no trace of the girl they once ignored at family tables. When the elevator opened, I stepped in. My hand hovered over the panel, then lowered. I wasn't ready to face him. Not yet. Some games don't end in the spotlight. They stretch into the quiet days after, when the victor decides the terms. Downstairs, I imagined him. Daniel, once standing tall in boardrooms, now sunk into a lobby chair. His suit wrinkled from waiting. His eyes scanned every person who walked past, hoping one of them was me. I pressed the button for the executive lounge instead. The doors slid shut. The distance between us was only 60 floors, but it may as well have been an ocean. For years, I was the one left waiting at the edges of photographs, at the outskirts of conversations, at the corner of tables where no one cared to look. Now it was his turn. And this time, he wasn't the man being celebrated. He was just another name waiting at the front desk, hoping to be let in. The phone rang once more on my desk upstairs. It went unanswered. This was the aftermath. This was the price. And it was only the beginning. 3 days after the party, Daniel walked into my world. Not as the golden son my parents had always praised. Not as the confident executive Greenmart once worshipped. He came in as a man hollowed out, stripped of the illusion he carried like armor for years. The elevator opened with a muted chime. His steps were slower than I remembered. The afternoon light spilled through the wide glass walls of Liberty Capital's 60th floor, throwing his shadow long across the polished marble. He looked smaller against the backdrop of Manhattan than he ever had in our childhood home. I stayed seated behind my desk. It was deliberate. This office wasn't just space. It was territory carved through late nights, years of silence and battles no one in my family had cared to see. He entered it as a visitor. I waited composed, watching him close the door behind him with a hand that shook slightly. "Rachel," he said, voice gravelly, words catching. "Give me a chance. I can still run Greenmart. I can fix this. I just need a place to stand." I let him finish. I studied the lines etched deep on his face, the circles under his eyes. His suit, once tailored perfectly, looked rumpled, almost desperate. For years I dreamed of this moment, of him stripped of arrogance, and yet watching him crumble, I felt no satisfaction, only clarity. "This deal saved Greenmart, Daniel," I said evenly. "It didn't save you." The silence after those words stretched. He shifted in his chair, clearing his throat, trying to pull himself together. For a second, his old bravado sparked. "You wouldn't let your own brother drown." "You're not that cold." I leaned forward. "You drowned yourself. I just stopped pulling you to shore." At that moment, Harper Lee entered quietly. Professional calm, her presence filled the space with something heavier than family history law. She opened her leather briefcase and placed a stack of documents on the desk. She spoke with clarity, no hesitation. "Mr. Hayes, these agreements finalize your resignation from Greenmart. They include a non-compete clause effective immediately. Once signed, you'll officially have no authority or involvement in company operations." Daniel's face twitched. You expect me to just walk away? Harper's gaze was steady. There isn't an expectation, sir. It's a legal requirement. Without this, the acquisition doesn't close. His eyes darted to me, almost pleading, almost furious. Rachel, you can't seriously back this. I built Greenmart with my own hands. I stood then circling the desk slowly. My heels clicked softly on the floor, each step deliberate. I stopped at his side. You didn't build it alone. You inherited the applause. You never noticed the cracks. I did. And while you were busy believing in your own myth, I was writing the terms of your survival. He flinched, but I pressed on my tone firm. This isn't about crushing you. My revenge isn't dragging you beneath me. It's proving I was never beneath you to begin with. His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in my life, Daniel Hayes had no words. His hand hovered above the pen. Harper slid toward him. The weight of it seemed unbearable. He tried again. If I sign this, what am I? What do I have left? His voice cracked. Rachel, I'm your brother. I took a breath. My answer wasn't cruel, it was honest. You're the one who made blood mean nothing when you treated me as less. You said I was just a gardener. But gardeners grow things, Daniel. They cultivate, they rebuild. That's what I did. That's why I'm here. And you're sitting there. The silence was thick. Outside, the hum of Manhattan carried faintly a reminder that the world was still spinning, uncaring of the fall of one man. Finally, Daniel's fingers wrapped around the pen. His grip was unsteady. Slowly, haltingly, he lowered it to the paper. The scratch of ink against the contract cut through the room, each stroke of his name louder than any insult he'd ever thrown at me. When the last letter trailed off, he let the pen slip from his grasp. His shoulders slumped. He wasn't defeated in a dramatic collapse, he was just finished. Harper gathered the signed pages, stacked them neatly, and placed them back in her briefcase. She gave me a small nod. It's complete. Daniel rubbed his temple, his eyes unfocused. For a man who had once commanded rooms, he looked like he was searching for a way to disappear inside one. I walked back to my chair, lifted the glass of water waiting for me, and took a sip. The cool taste grounded me. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The document spoke louder than anything I could say. One signature can end a dynasty, I said softly, though every word was sharp enough to linger. And sometimes Daniel. That's all the justice the world requires. He didn't reply. His eyes were on the floor. His shadow stretched thin across the marble fragile against the vastness of my office. And just like that, the man who once reveled in reminding me of my place sat across from me as proof of his own downfall. I set the glass down, the sound echoing in the still room. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was final. Not every kind of justice needs a courtroom. Sometimes it arrives quietly through a truth too clear to deny. That afternoon, I stood by the tall glass window in my office 60 floors above Manhattan. The city stretched out below me, alive with motion, golden under the late sun. For years, I had looked at skylines like this from the outside. Now it lay within reach, a world I had built for myself. The desk behind me was covered with files and reports, but one object caught my eye. The morning's Wall Street Journal folded neatly. The headline, bold and unmistakable, Liberty Capital completes Greenmart acquisition. It wasn't just an announcement. It was closed printed in black ink for everyone to see. The phone rang, its sharp sound cutting through the quiet office. I glanced at the screen. Mom and Dad. For a moment I hesitated. They rarely called me. Most of my life I was the one calling them, trying to be heard. Now it was their turn. I lifted the receiver. A pause. Then my mother's voice broke and shaky. Rachel, we were wrong. So wrong. For too long. Can you forgive us? I listened as my father exhaled heavily in the background. He didn't speak, but I could feel the weight in his silence. I let the moment stretch. My fingers tapped lightly on the desk. At last I said softly, I heard you, and nothing more. I didn't offer promises. I didn't rush to comfort. Forgiveness isn't a gift I owe anyone. It's something they'll have to find on their own. Not long after my computer chimed, a new email. I clicked it open. The sender, Elena Ramirez. For a moment, I just stared at the name. In another life, she was the friend who laughed when others doubted me, the one who smirked at the word gardener. The subject line read, Application for Analyst Position, Liberty Capital. I leaned back in my chair, reading the first few lines of her cover letter. Her tone was formal, polished, and carefully humble. I smiled faintly, then closed the laptop. No need to reply right away. Karma had its own timing, and here it was knocking on my office door without me lifting a hand. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside lay a single business card, edges frayed. The ink faded with time. Rachel Hayes. Reception desk. I placed it on the glossy wood surface right next to the bold headline in the newspaper. The two objects couldn't have been more different, one the symbol of where I began, the other the proof of where I stood now. Every empire starts with a single brick, I thought. For me, it was that card, that job no one in my family thought mattered. They saw dirt under my nails. I saw the roots of something greater. I looked out again at Manhattan, the horizon bathed in amber light. This city had once seemed too vast, too indifferent to notice someone like me. But the truth is, cities don't choose their rulers. They simply reflect the power of those who dare to take them. I picked up the business card once more, turning it between my fingers, then set it down firmly on top of the newspaper. That image said everything. The gardener who once answered phones now owned the garden everyone else had overlooked. The phone sat silent on the desk. The email stayed unread. The world moved forward, and I was no longer the shadow in the background of someone else's story. The greatest revenge isn't about bringing someone down, but about living so well that they can never look down on you again. I let that truth linger in the quiet, then allowed myself a small smile. And that I whispered steady and sure as how the gardener bought the garden. The screen fades with the last light of Manhattan spilling across the office.
Your son isn't really yours, my mother-in-law, Patricia declared, waving a piece of paper triumphantly in my face. Her perfectly manicured nails gripped the DNA test results like a weapon. I'm taking him to my house where he belongs. I stood in my kitchen, still wearing my gardening gloves, dirt smudge on my jeans from planting spring bulbs with my 6-year-old son Marcus just hours earlier. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting strange shadows across Patricia's face as she delivered what she clearly thought was her knockout blow. Go ahead, I said calmly, pulling off my gloves and setting them on the counter. My response clearly threw her. She'd expected tears, denial, maybe even begging. Instead, I was smiling. What? Patricia's perfectly penciled eyebrows drew together in confusion. Did you hear what I said? These DNA results prove Marcus isn't your biological child. I poured myself a glass of water, taking my time before responding. I heard you perfectly, Patricia, and I said go ahead. Take Marcus to your house. My mother-in-law's triumphant expression faltered slightly. In the 10 years I'd been married to her son David, she'd never seen me this calm in the face of her accusations. Usually, I'd defend myself, try to reason with her, or leave the room in tears. But not today. Today was different. I've already called David, she pressed on, regaining her momentum. He's devastated. To think you've been lying all these years, pretending Marcus was yours when really, she paused for dramatic effect, you must have used an egg donor or something equally deceitful. I couldn't help but laugh, which only seemed to infuriate her more. Did you enjoy your secret little trip to the DNA testing facility last week? The one where you convinced Marcus it was just a fun science experiment. Patricia's face paled slightly. How did you know about that? I finished for her. Oh, Patricia, I know about a lot of things, like how you've been planning this ambush for months, how you've been telling David I'm an unfit mother, how you've been trying to convince him that Marcus would be better off living with you. She straightened her designer blazer, trying to regain control of the situation. Well, now I have proof. These results don't lie. Marcus shares DNA with David and me, but not with you. You're not his real mother. I walked to my home office, Patricia trailing behind me like a shark sensing blood in the water. Opening my desk drawer, I pulled out a thick manila envelope. You're right about one thing, I said, turning to face her. Those results don't lie. Marcus does share DNA with you and David. And you're also right that I'm not his biological mother. Patricia's eyes lit up with vindication, but before she could speak, I continued. I've never claimed to be. In fact, it's all documented right here. The egg donation process, the IVF procedures, every legal document signed by David and me before Marcus was born. We chose this path together because I couldn't carry a child naturally. David knows everything. He was there every step of the way. The color drained from Patricia's face as I laid out document after document on my desk. But he said that he was devastated. I finished for her. Oh, he is, but not about Marcus's genetics. He's devastated that his own mother would go behind our backs, take our child for secret DNA testing, and try to use it as a weapon. I pulled out my phone and played a recording. Mom, how could you do this? David's voice filled the room. We've told you about the IVF, about Sarah's fertility struggles, about our decision to use an egg donor. Multiple times. This ends now. Patricia sank into my office chair, her hands trembling. But I thought. You thought you finally found a way to get rid of me, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. You thought you could use this to take Marcus away. But here's what you didn't consider, Patricia. Love and biology aren't the same thing. I carried Marcus for 9 months. I went through morning sickness, labor, midnight feedings. I'm the one who knows that he hates crusts on his sandwiches and needs his green dinosaur plushie to sleep. I'm his mother in every way that matters. Through the window, I could see Marcus playing in the backyard, his dark hair catching the sunlight as he dug in his sandbox. My son, in every way that mattered. David will be home soon, I continued. He left work early when I told him what you'd done. So yes, Patricia, go ahead and take Marcus to your house. Try to explain to a judge why you took a minor for medical testing without parental consent. Try to justify why you thought genetics trumped legal parenthood. See how that works out for you. Patricia's carefully constructed plan was crumbling around her, and we both knew it. But as I watched her struggling to process her failure, I felt an unexpected pang of pity. How empty must her life be to spend so much energy trying to destroy her son's happiness? You know what the saddest part is? I said softly. You've spent so much time trying to prove I'm not Marcus's real mother that you've forgotten how to be a good grandmother. You could have had a beautiful relationship with him, but instead you chose this. The sound of David's car pulling into the driveway cut through the tension. Patricia stood up quickly, gathering her purse and the now useless DNA results. This isn't over, she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. I smiled, gathering up my documents and returning them to their drawer. Actually, Patricia, it is. David and I agreed. This was your last chance. From now on, any contact with Marcus will be supervised, if it happens at all. As David's key turned in the front door, I watched my mother-in-law's face crumple with the realization that her perfect plan hadn't just failed. It had backfired spectacularly. She had tried to use my son's genetics to destroy me, never realizing that I'd been prepared for this moment all along. Through the window, I could hear Marcus's delighted cry of "Daddy" as David walked into the backyard. My family, built on love, choice, and commitment, not just DNA. And no amount of genetic testing could ever change that. The weeks following Patricia's failed DNA ambush brought changes I hadn't expected. David, usually so hesitant to confront his mother, became my fiercest defender. He blocked her number after she spent 3 days sending manipulative messages about protecting her grandson's interests. I should have done this years ago, he said one evening as we watched Marcus building a Lego tower in the living room. Every time she attacked you, I told myself she just needed time to accept you. I was wrong. I squeezed his hand, remembering all the times I'd hidden my tears after Patricia's helpful suggestions about how I could be a better mother. You're doing it now. That's what matters. But Patricia wasn't done. She started showing up at Marcus's school, trying to pick him up early. Thanks to our lawyer's foresight, we'd already alerted the administration of the situation. Each attempt was documented and added to our growing file. One afternoon, I received a call from Marcus's teacher, Mrs. Thompson. Mrs. Sullivan was here again, she said, referring to Patricia. This time she brought photos, trying to convince us she had evidence he were unfit. We escorted her off the property and called the police. What kind of photos? I asked, though I could guess. Mostly normal moments taken out of context. Marcus with a scraped knee, looking upset after a timeout. Nothing that suggests actual neglect. Mrs. Thompson paused. She seemed desperate. Desperate was the perfect word. Patricia had always been controlling, but this was different. Her mask of sophisticated superiority was cracking, revealing something darker underneath. The final straw came during Marcus's soccer game. I was cheering from the sidelines when I heard her voice behind me. "You think you've won, but I've hired a lawyer," Patricia announced loudly enough for nearby parents to hear. "We're going to prove you're an unfit mother." "Did you know she can't even have children of her own?" she stage whispered to another mom. I turned slowly, aware of the curious eyes watching us. "Patricia, this is Marcus's game. Don't do this here." "Do what?" "Tell the truth." She pulled out her phone. "I have videos of everything. How you yell sometimes, how Marcus cried last week when you made him finish his homework before playing. A judge will see." "See what?" I interrupted calmly. "That I'm a normal mother. That I set boundaries. That sometimes parenting is messy and imperfect." Other parents were moving closer now, drawn by the drama, but also, I realized, forming a protective circle around me. These were people who'd seen me volunteer at school events, host playdates, cheer at every game. "Mrs. Harrison," one of the dads called out, "I think you should leave. Now." "You don't understand," Patricia protested. "She's not even his real mother." "I understand perfectly," said Emma, another soccer mom. "You're harassing my friend and disrupting our kids' game. Security is already on their way." Sure enough, the field's security guard was walking over. Patricia's face flushed as she realized her audience wasn't sympathetic. "This isn't over," she hissed before storming off. That evening, after Marcus was asleep, David and I sat in our backyard, the spring air cool against our skin. "I filed for a restraining order today," he said quietly. "The lawyer says with all the documentation we have, the unauthorized DNA test, the school incidents, today's scene, we should get it approved quickly." I leaned against his shoulder, feeling the tension of the past weeks finally start to release. "How are you doing with all this?" He was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about when we first decided to use an egg donor. Remember how scared we were? Not about the genetics, but about whether we'd be good parents." I remembered those days clearly, the fertility treatments that failed, the heartbreaking decisions, the hope that came with choosing another path to parenthood. "And now look at us," he continued. "We've got this amazing kid who loves science and soccer and has your exact same laugh. DNA be damned. Meanwhile, my mother, who shares his genetics, can't see past biology to love him properly. Or to love you properly," I added softly. "She's hurting you too." David nodded, his eyes glistening in the dim light. "You know what Marcus said to me yesterday? He asked if Grandma was sick because she keeps acting scary. Our 6-year-old shouldn't have to worry about that." I thought about Marcus's question, about Patricia's increasingly erratic behavior. Maybe she is sick, in a way. But that doesn't make it okay. We sat in companionable silence, listening to the distant sound of traffic and the wind rustling through trees. Despite everything Patricia had put us through, our family felt stronger than ever. She had tried to use genetics to drive us apart, but instead, she'd only proven how unimportant DNA really was to real family bonds. "I got a call from the lawyer today, too," I said finally. "She thinks we should consider pressing charges for the unauthorized DNA test. Apparently, it's a form of medical assault to test a minor without parental consent." David tensed beside me. "What do you think we should do?" I thought carefully before answering. "I think we need to send a clear message that this behavior won't be tolerated. Not just for us, but for Marcus. He needs to see that we'll protect him, even if it means making hard choices." He pulled me closer. "When did you get so wise?" "Probably around the time I realized that being a mother has nothing to do with genetics and everything to do with love." As if on cue, we heard Marcus call out from his bedroom, probably another request for water, his favorite bedtime delay tactic. As we stood up to head inside, David caught my hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For being exactly the mother our son needs, DNA test or not." I smiled, remembering Patricia's triumphant face when she waved those test results at me. She had thought she was destroying my family, never realizing she was only proving how unshakable our bonds really were. 1 year later, I sat in our backyard watching Marcus chase fireflies at dusk. The restraining order against Patricia had been approved months ago, bringing a piece to our lives we hadn't realized we were missing. David sat beside me, both of us enjoying the warm summer evening and our son's delighted laughter. "Mom," Marcus called out, running over with his hands cupped. "Look what I caught." I leaned forward as he carefully opened his fingers, revealing the gentle blinking light within. "Beautiful," I said, smiling at his proud expression. "Remember what we learned about why they glow?" "Bioluminescence," he exclaimed, pronouncing the word carefully. "Can we look it up in my science book again?" David chuckled. "Tomorrow, buddy. It's almost bedtime." As Marcus released the firefly, I thought about how much had changed since Patricia's DNA test scheme. The legal charges for unauthorized medical testing of a minor had resulted in a hefty fine and mandatory counseling sessions for her. More importantly, it had forced her to face the consequences of her actions. Last month, we'd received a letter from her therapist. Patricia had been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and was finally getting help. While it didn't excuse her behavior, it helped explain the desperate need for control that had driven her to such extremes. "Sarah?" David's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Everything okay?" I nodded, watching Marcus chase another firefly, just thinking about how sometimes the worst moments lead us to better places. He knew what I meant. After everything with Patricia, we'd started attending family therapy ourselves, learning to set healthier boundaries and communicate better. David had finally processed years of his mother's manipulation, understanding how it had affected his own parenting. "Did I tell you what Marcus said at school yesterday?" I asked, remembering the story his teacher had shared. They were discussing families in class, and someone mentioned that families had to share DNA to be real. Marcus stood up and said that wasn't true because love makes real families, not blood. David's eyes softened. "He's pretty amazing, isn't he?" "He is," I agreed. "And you know what? He got that wisdom from both of us, DNA or not." The doorbell rang, interrupting our moment. It was Emma from the soccer team, dropping off some forms for the upcoming season. As we chatted, she mentioned that she'd run into Patricia at the grocery store. "She actually apologized," Emma said, sounding surprised, "for making a scene at the game last year. Said she was getting help now." After Emma left, David and I discussed this new development. We'd received similar reports from other parents. Patricia making amends, acknowledging her behavior had been wrong. While we weren't ready to lift the restraining order, it was encouraging to see her taking responsibility. "Maybe someday," David said thoughtfully, watching Marcus head inside for bedtime. "Not now, but maybe someday she can have a relationship with him again. A healthy one." I squeezed his hand, understanding the mix of hope and caution in his voice. One day at a time. Later that night, after tucking Marcus in with his beloved green dinosaur plushie, I found David in our home office, looking at old family photos. He held up one from the day we brought Marcus home from the hospital. "Look at your face here," he said softly. "That's pure love. That's what makes a mother, not some DNA test." I sat beside him, remembering that day, the overwhelming joy, the fierce protectiveness, the absolute certainty that this was my son, regardless of genetics. "You know what's funny?" I said, flipping through more photos. "Patricia tried to use that test to prove I wasn't Marcus's real mother. But all she did was prove that biology means nothing compared to real love." David nodded, pulling out another photo, this one of Marcus and me gardening together, both of us covered in dirt and laughing. "I've learned so much from you about what family really means. Thank you for showing me that love is a choice we make every day." As we got ready for bed that night, I heard Marcus call out from his room. "Mom, can you come here?" I found him sitting up in bed, clutching his dinosaur. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "I made you something at school today," he said, pulling a folded paper from under his pillow. "It's for Mother's Day, but I want to give it to you now." The paper revealed a carefully drawn family portrait, David, Marcus, and me surrounded by a huge red heart. Across the top, in his best 7-year-old handwriting, he'd written, "Love makes a family." I hugged him tight, feeling tears prick at my eyes. Patricia's DNA test had tried to prove I wasn't Marcus's mother, but this crayon drawing proved everything that really mattered. In the end, she had failed to understand the most basic truth, that motherhood isn't determined by genetics, but by love, choice, and dedication. As I kissed Marcus goodnight and turned out his light, I felt a deep sense of peace. We had weathered Patricia's storm and emerged stronger, our bonds reinforced by the very attack meant to break them. Our family's foundation wasn't built on DNA, but on something far more powerful: the daily choice to love, protect, and cherish each other, no matter what.